Okay, let's get started. The recording is on. Hi, everyone. This is Melissa Potvin. I am your CA Community Manager. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day here on a Friday to join our APM Community Webcast. I'm excited to let you know that we have Audie Murati here from our pre-sales organization to talk to you about digital experience insights, how to build a world-class digital experience. It's a great presentation today, and of course, you can ask questions at the end of today's presentation live to Audie, or you can ask questions within the Q&A panel in the WebEx during, and we'll get to them at the end as well. All lines are on mute. I'll give you instructions on how to unmute yourself at the end of the presentation. I think we're good to go now. Audie, I pass to you. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Melissa. So just to start off, I'll give a brief introduction of my experience here. So as Melissa was mentioning, I am a pre-sales consultant here at CA Technologies. Prior to that, I've had some experience as a developer and actually as a support technician as well. So a little bit on all ends of the spectrum. So this has a little place, a little personal place in my heart. So I'll go ahead, I'll relate from my personal experience as well as some of the things that I've found will be most useful when it comes to identifying the important aspects of digital experience. So starting off, I'll go ahead, I'll explain a little bit about the monitoring environment as we look at it today. I'll go into how we use digital experience insights to understand more about front-end and back-end application experience. So if there's a code level problem, we want to get greater visibility into that. I'll also talk a little bit about how digital experience insights helps you understand more about the infrastructure aspect. So for instance, if a server goes down, that does also hinder the experience that a customer has with their applications and our business as a whole. So we want to be able to understand that and monitor that as well. I'll touch a little bit on the customizable dashboarding that we offer in the solution as well, the ability to create your own flexible dashboards. Then I'll go into the demonstration itself, and finally we'll open for the Q&A. So starting off, when it comes to monitoring, there's a lot of different components that are involved in providing a good experience for customers. For one, we have that front-end application component. So things like if we have a mobile application or a browser-based application, there are a lot of businesses that try to apply things like synthetic monitoring as well, and we also have synthetic monitoring. So we want to be able to get this full front-end visibility, understand if a user clicks on a button and it fails, why did it fail, so that we can actually address that. We also have that back-end performance. We want to understand things like on the back-end side, how are microservices laid out? Where are containers having performance issues? If we're making a database call and the query has an error in it, we want to be able to understand that error. And we want to be able to understand some of the general exceptions that we throw inside the back-end application itself. It's basically the supporting architecture. So this is a little bit about the outside in view, like as a customer's shoe input view. And we also have that inside out view, being able to understand it from inside the business looking out. But we also have infrastructure. On top of all of these applications, supporting all of these application components, whether it's front end or whether it's back end, we have infrastructure making up all the pieces. So we need to understand more about the infrastructure itself. Even if an application performs the way it's supposed to, if the infrastructure fails, we want to understand more about that. And that's the idea of monitoring today. We want to be able to have this holistic view into monitoring, understanding it from the outside in, the inside out, but also the infrastructure that makes up the whole. So starting off, when we want to understand more about the outside in view, we want to understand a little bit about what our customers are experiencing. A couple of the key things to think of is, where do your customers abandon your applications? Do they go to a certain screen and then leave? Is there a certain screen that they hit more often than others? Do we need to prioritize that one more? Is there a certain way that they navigate that we really need to consider when it comes to designing our application and improving our application going forward? We also want to be able to pinpoint the key issues that a user has. So for instance, if we have a mobile application, and the user encounters a crash, we really want to understand what did they click that caused that crash so that we can more quickly remediate that issue and address that issue. So if we can see, for instance, that a user clicked a certain button and that certain button led to a crash, we want to know two things. What button did they click so that we can actually see how they got there? And two, we want to understand what was that exception that was thrown so that as a developer or as a team, we want to be able to go in, find that issue as quickly as possible and address it so no one else is impacted by that. We also want to be able to dive into individual user sessions so that we can understand more about how users are impacted. So just to give a little example where I found this very helpful is when it comes to support tickets. A lot of companies receive report tickets, right? And you'll have the customers often complaining about, I went ahead, I clicked this button, it failed, and your application crashed. And we want to be able to get that visibility. We want to see what did the user do and where did they hit a hiccup so that we can quickly address that issue. One of the first things that I was always told as a support engineer was the first step in addressing and fixing a problem is replicate, replicate, replicate. If you can't replicate the issue, how do you fix it? And that's the idea here, is it's far too difficult to try and replicate every single issue on every single environment, on every single application. It just becomes far too difficult a task. But if you can actually see what the user did to get to that issue, you've replicated the issue without having to go through all that legwork of fixing up the whole situation yourself. So this really simplifies that process. Continuing on, we want to understand a little bit about the back-end side. And as I was mentioning before, we want to understand about the experience and how the back-end application supports the customer's experience. And that starts off with the experience view here of our APM part of the solution. What we're able to do is we want to be able to see which applications are having problems, and we want to be able to prioritize the applications that are impacting the customers most. And I'll explain more about this as we go through the demonstration itself. But basically what we want to see here is we want to understand if there's an application that's failing, is it hurting the customer? If so, that needs to be a first priority, and then we can move on to the other issues that aren't directly impacting customers. It's all about ensuring our revenue part of the business, making sure that that's working the way it needs to, but also making sure that the customer portion of the business is working the way it needs to. And to help facilitate that, we also have our assisted triage. What this allows us to do is it allows us to see the application topology itself. So from the front end all the way to the back, all the way to the database, we want to be able to see which parts of the puzzle failed. And we want to be able to dive to a code level understanding to be able to see what did that failure cause. What transactions did that failure impact, and what line of code was the root cause of that problem so that we can address it. We also want to be able to understand more about how a user can go from the front end to the back end. We want to be able to see that correlated end user monitoring. So we want to be able to see that front end component, seeing where the user clicks and how they have a crash on a mobile device or a mobile application. And we want to be able to see what was the back end part of that. What was the stack trace on the back? What did that look like? But again, as I was mentioning before, supporting all of these applications, we have infrastructure. Infrastructure is essential to all of this business. And so we also want to be able to correlate that as well. So inside the solution, we're actually able to link to infrastructure support. So by using this digital experience insight solution, we can actually see the front-end application. We can see the back-end application performance. And we can even understand from an infrastructure level the performance as well. And then as a final point, what we often have discovered when speaking with customers is where most of these dashboards fit their needs out of the box, a lot of them often have a custom dashboard in mind. Maybe there's a certain way that they understood things better. Maybe they want to see the impact on revenue. Maybe they want to see certain pages. Maybe they want to understand their business a certain way. And we actually offer that customizable dashboarding as well, so that they can go in, create their own dashboards in a quick and easy process so that they can actually go and understand it the way they need to see it. And with that, we'll start with the demonstration. So starting off, we've got this front-end performance. We want to be able to understand with our applications the issues that users encounter and where those issues begin. And we want to get that view from their perspective. So starting off, we have two different charts. And these two different charts are really key to the start because we need to understand where to prioritize. So specifically, what I mean by this is there are usually two key ways that businesses prioritize their application and their different components. The first is from a business level standpoint. This would be things like the app ranking. So it might be the number of sessions, it might be the number of users, and there's a variety of other metrics that we might want to rank our business off of. But there's also problems. We also want to consider problems. We want to know which applications had the worst problems and how can we address those further. And so just a few problems that we might want to consider and prioritize by might be crashes, might be latency, might be application startup time. So what I can actually see here is looking across both the business ranking and the problematic ranking, I can actually see that TixChange, this TixChange application is by far my top priority. It has the most for crashes, and it actually has the most for users by quite a bit. So this is easily going to be my top priority. So I click into this, and it's actually going to expand my view for specifically this application. From here, I can actually see an overview of information about this application. I can see sessions, requests, page hits for web applications, but also I actually have a geospatial map to tell me how this application's being used, specifically from a location standpoint. So if we have an issue based on a certain location, I want to know that. Or if we have a certain group of users that use this application more heavily, maybe the United States uses this application more than any other country, I want to know that. And so I can actually see that based on usage, or I can see if there are any problems like HTTP errors, or if there's an exception that was thrown, or if there's a performance issue, things like latency again. Those are key when it comes to understanding where users are using our application and where they're encountering problems. So from here, we can actually dive a little bit deeper into the screens where we can see a little bit more about how the users actually use the application. To start with, we can actually see the different application components, the different application screens based on performance, problems, and usage, again, like we were talking about before. So I might zoom into problems. I might want to see the problems here. And it actually has shown us by the red outline here that there are two key points, two key screens that are actually having issues more than any others. It looks like the login screen is at the top with about 103 crashes. So I'm going to want to understand a little bit more about that. But there's also this view on the products screen. And it looks like that's due to a few different errors that we encountered. So my top focus here is going to be the login screen. But we can also dive into the flow view. And the reason why this is important is we want to understand more about how users navigate our application. As I was mentioning before, we want to know where users go inside the application. What screens do they prefer? And so there are three key things that we really want to understand here. The first is the number of sessions. This basically means the number of users that have gone through each of these screens. So I can actually see across the top here, it looks like this session from this TixChange home screen all the way to this login screen, this is actually where most of the users have interacted in our application. So this transaction, this interaction is going to be the top of mind for me. there are two other things we want to consider, and that's drops. So what you might notice is that we suddenly have only 50 sessions that continue on. And that might raise a question for you. You might ask, well, why are there only 50? We can actually see that a large number of users actually drop off. That's what the orange is here. A large number of users actually abandon the application after the home screen. That might be something I want to understand a little bit more as well. I might want to see a little bit about why are users abandoning this application at the home screen. And as a final note, we have crashes and errors. Again, we have that login screen that was causing us so much trouble just in this previous screen here. So this is going to be my top priority, I think. It has the highest in crashes, it has a few drop-offs, and it looks like this is pretty much where all of the sessions end. So they either dropped off here and quit, or the application crashed before they could do anything else. So I'm going to actually click this, and I want to see a little bit about, well, what were users doing on the screen that caused this crash? And what's a little bit surprising for me is we can see all their different interactions, and by far the most focused point is this login button. And this might raise a question for me, because if my users are having trouble logging in to my application here, then how are they able to do any other business with me? So this is something I want to understand, but now I can actually see what the users are clicking in general. They're mostly clicking this login button. So from here, I can actually go into some of the general details. This is going to show me a correlation of all the different sessions that have interacted with this screen. So when we're seeing these problems, we can actually see if the problem was alerted or if there was a crash. We can actually see and tie these sessions, these individual sessions, to that button that we were just seeing, to that screen that we just encountered. So I'll actually dive into a session here. And I'm curious about how this session interlays with that previous screen we just saw. And this helps us dive directly into this individual viewpoint where we can see how this individual user, here we have B. Whitmarsh, how he interacted with the application. We can actually expand these screenshots and see what screens he navigated through before he got to this red portion, which signifies a crash. So at this point, this event, we can actually see that it crashed. So there are a couple key things that I want to know here. For one, I actually want to understand a bit more about why it crashed. And we can actually see that there's an exception in the top right. So I'll open this. It says unknown exception. And I see it's not giving me a whole lot of information here. Some of this might be fixed with symbolication. What it would do is it would basically capture this stack trace so that we can see what line of code through this issue, through this error, through this exception. And we can also see things like the class name and the method name. But since I haven't symbolicated this yet, I might need to look deeper and understand more about this. There are a few different ways that we can do that. For one, we actually have the thread view, so I can see what thread through this exception. And if I want to get that full stack view, I can actually expand that full view and see specifically more information about this. I can see the path that was involved, I can see the application, I can see the hardware model, and we can see more of this information about the threads and where the crash occurred. So from this, I do want to get a little bit more information. I'm going to need to look a little bit into this on the back-end side so that I can see maybe the crash was caused on that end. But with this in mind, I'm going to close this stack trace. We're going to dig into this just a little bit deeper. So in addition to being able to see these screens across the top and how the user navigated the application, we can actually also see specifically what they clicked on the screen. And this is really important because it helps us understand more about how they interacted with us. But we can also see how their interaction has impacted various different performance metrics. So for instance, if they make a request and there's a high latency, we'll see this response time go high. So we can actually see, for instance, this one looks like the highest response time. Looks like it took about 3 seconds of latency. That's a bit high. So I might want to get that lower and understand more about why this specific call was taking so long. But we can also see the impact on the device level. I can see what kind of CPU usage we're looking at, disk usage, or memory. Going further, I can actually see the individual events as well. But with this in mind, I actually might want to tie this to that back-end part that we were just talking about before. I might want to see specifically, how did users get there? And what impact did that have from the back end? So I can actually expand this. Just click Shop View Product and expand this event, and you'll actually notice there's a little button here. And just by clicking that button, I actually can go ahead. I can see the back end all the way from the front. We can actually see that Shop View Product that we went from just a minute ago from that iOS application. We can see how that ties in to the back and the calls that it was making to the back. I can even expand the specific transactions around here. And I might want to see more about what specific transactions were incurred. So here I've got a transaction trace. This is an individual session. And I'll expand this. And we can see the back-end stack trace that's involved. And you'll notice a few different components. So there are about 90 components here. I'm not going to expand this because this is actually blue. This looks okay. But it does look like there's this cross process here. And this one is yellow. This is something I want to expand. I want to understand a little bit more about why this is yellow. Why is it showing? And it actually looks like it's throwing some exceptions here. This is a point I might want to dig deeper into. So I can actually scroll down and see where the red stops. And that's usually the easiest way to pinpoint where this exception began. So it looks like it's specifically around this one check item web service that's being thrown on the back. We can see specifically what's going on here as far as this exception. And so I can understand more about where I need to go to fix it. We can understand more about the performance that was involved and some of the different properties that have been involved in this. We can also see what specifically was going on as far as an error message. So this helps us understand more from that back-end perspective what was going wrong. So with that in mind, there's also a way to do this from the back end as a start to application triage. So that's the idea of the experience view. So starting off, I start off with this experience view, and it shows me demo applications. And the idea of this is basically a report card. That's how I like to think of it. You have your report card score, which is 71% here. And this tells us how this specific experience is being used by the customer, how that experience is being relayed across to the customer. So I can see with these demo applications, 71% health, that's not something to be too happy about. That's something I want to work on and improve. And so I'll dive into that in just a minute. But we also have a few other items on here that I really want to elaborate on. The first is, of course, the status symbol. We can see the current health of this node. And so we can understand more about, with this current health, how is the application, how is this experience right now? We can also understand more about the problems, the anomalies that have occurred. So a problem might be something that's directly impacting a customer. So how I like to think of it is, say for instance you use a retail application like Amazon, and you go to make a purchase, and you click purchase, and it's Amazon Prime Day. You're really excited for this item. This is the one you've been waiting for all year. Black Friday sale or Amazon Prime Day. You click purchase, and it says it failed. So you click it 150 more times, and it still fails, and you get really upset. This would be something that would be a problem. And the reason why it's a problem is because as the business, this is directly impacting my customer. He's not able to buy the product when he should have been, right? It would have helped my business, would have helped my company. So this is a front end, a customer-facing experience. We also have anomalies. These might be more of those back-end code-level issues, but they don't directly impact the customer. What I mean by that is maybe it's a minor issue that's not directly impacting that transaction. So where we are very concerned about that user clicking the purchase button and it failing, we might not be as concerned about an internal notification service that failed. It didn't directly impact the customer, it just didn't warn us when we wanted it to. And so we still want to know that this is an issue. So that would show up in anomalies, and we'd go and address that further. And again, we can actually see the number of transactions, the ratio of transactions of unhealthy transactions to healthy transactions. And that's a pretty high ratio here. We can actually see that a lot of users are having this problem. So I can dive deeper into this and understand more about the individual components here. You'll notice as I expanded these demo applications, 3 services showed up. They made up the whole of this demo applications experience for our customers. Again, using the idea, the logic that we just went through, the idea of the report card system, I can pretty quickly tell it's this reporting service, 65% health. But additionally, we also have problems and anomalies on the right. So you might recall that we saw 2 problems that are occurring. We can actually see that those 2 problems are the 2 problems we have over here. So it looks like we've got an issue with the database where it experienced some errors, and the front end seems to be impacted as well. So we might dive deeper into that. I can actually click on this problem, and again, it tells me the impacted experiences. You remember that front end transaction we saw just a minute ago? One of the problems, one of the serious problems that we were facing, and it's because of this impacted experience here. So this is something I'd want to dig a little bit deeper into. From here, if I need to share this information with the developer, I can do so just by sharing this URL, and it would be as simple as clicking and immediately hopping into this screen and being able to see this view. But I might also want to open the analysis notebook itself. And the reason why is I might want to understand the internal pieces here. What specifically caused this reporting service to fail? So by expanding the analysis notebook, it's actually going to present us with this holistic view here, where again, we can see the application topology from the front to the back. We can change the perspective based on how we understand these applications better, this application environment better. So let me scroll down here just to give a better view. So we can create our own perspectives based on how we understand it better. So to give an example, a lot of developers understand more about host names, communicating across different host names. Maybe I've got a host name in Alaska and it's communicating with a host name in Nebraska, and I really want to see how that communication is going. We can actually lay out the application based on the perspective that we need to see. So some of the popular types are things like location. Maybe we've got 2 data centers that are communicating. Maybe that's causing the issue. Or maybe we need to understand more about from the end user to the application part. Or maybe we want to go ahead and understand just like a default overview here, which would show the reporting service going all the way to the back to this host name. So I might want to dig just a little bit deeper, see more about this issue. We know that it's on this Derby database, so I can actually expand this issue, and you'll notice it actually tells me the error message. So it actually threw an error here, and it's telling me that it tried to insert a specific value into this order summary values. You can see that here, just highlighted it. And what it's telling us is it's even telling us the issue that it caught. It's an integrity constraint violation exception. So just kind of to explain this a little bit, this might be if we tried to insert a certain type that wasn't the appropriate type. So for example, maybe I tried to insert a string where there was supposed to be an integer. And if so, this is going to cause a problem, right? It's going to throw an error. And so now we actually know that error. We can actually understand more about that and address more about that. So I might close this up. We might want to see a little bit more about those transactions, or we might want to go into more of a map view. We might want to see, now that we've done this assisted triage, we might want to see, well, how is the map laid out as far as these applications? So for instance, I could take it back to this map view that we saw before, this example that we had before, where we can see the applications, this shop view product from our mobile application going all the way to the back end. We might want to see as well, in addition to understanding more about the application map as a whole, this topology, we might want to see more about the infrastructure level component. And we can actually do that. you'll notice there are a few different views here in the map. We have that application layer. We have an APM infrastructure layer, which would tell us more things like host-level metrics or metrics around containers, which are becoming very popular, right? Docker. Or if we need to understand more about microservices, we want to get a better view into that. But we also have this infrastructure layer.
The system has detected that a minimum number of lines are connected to this conference. Do you want to continue your meeting?
There's that error. You can
press
continue.
1 to confirm. If there is no response, the conference will end.
Are you there?
Yeah.
You can continue. Yep,
okay.
We're good.
So when we look at this infrastructure layer, this will actually tell us more about the infrastructure impact. What if one of these issues, what if the application issues weren't directly related to application? Meaning, for instance, let's say a server goes down, right? Looking at the application view, we might initially say, well, the application's not working. This back end is failing. But we might want to understand that from an infrastructure level and see, well, is the server down or is the application having code level issues? We've already gone through a little bit about the application code level issues, but what if we wanted to understand more about the infrastructure layer? And we can actually expand that. And what we're going to see is we're going to see a few different infrastructure nodes that are laid out on the map. And this will actually allow us to dive in to a select infrastructure node so that we can actually see the different alerts that have been triggered and understand how that relates to our application performance. So you'll notice I actually have two components here, two hosts that I really want to consider, and both of them are actually throwing alerts. I'll click on this one just to understand more about what's going on here. And you'll notice the alert on the right, it actually tells us this is an AWS probe by IM, by our infrastructure monitoring tool. And this is very powerful because it allows us to monitor things like if you have VMs or Docker containers or AWS like we have here, we can actually understand more about the infrastructure level component. And what you'll notice is with this AWS probe, we actually will be able to click into this and see more about why did it trigger this alert. And so it's going to bring up this infrastructure level view where we can see that this CPU monitor actually was used past a certain time that was expected. So it went outside this expected limit, this CPU utilization. It went higher than we really needed it to. And we might want to get a bit more of a view into that. So by clicking this, I can actually see the overview. So I can see the different information around this environment that we monitored. We can see more about the specific device details. So I can see things like the operating system that was involved. The vendor was Amazon. It's an AWS system. And I can understand more about the environment as a whole. And as a final point, the key thing that I really want to know is with the CPU utilization, can I see what CPU utilization looked like for this system? So I can actually click this, and you'll notice that there have been spikes. And these are things that I might look into on the system. I might want to see inside the infrastructure what caused these spikes. I might want to do a log and check the log and see what caused these spikes. Was it a large number of users that were trying to use this server all of a sudden or this AWS system? What contributed to these spikes? As a final thing that we might want to understand more about is, for the most part, these dashboards that I presented will help most customers. This is how most customers really need to understand their environments, and a lot of them understand it this way. But some of them are going to have those custom use cases, and we do want to consider that as well. So there is a way to actually approach that custom use cases, and I do want to show that just briefly. So for instance, if I click here, you'll notice it has this data studio. And this data studio is actually built on an open source system that we've actually made enterprise grade. And what I mean by that is we've considered a large number of different things like multi-tenancy and handling a certain amount of load, and we've incorporated that into our approach here. So with this, we'll actually be able to see more about that custom dashboarding that's involved and actually dive a little bit deeper into that, seeing what specific dashboards or what specific information do we want to understand. And what we'll be able to see here is I've got our first dashboard. This is just a general overview dashboard. So I'll give it just a minute to load everything. I can actually see it for the last 15 minutes, or I can actually expand this based on how I need to see it going forward. So maybe I want to understand it all the way back to 2 years. So I could actually expand this dashboard and see the information that's related to these different time frames. And we can see information based on a variety of different features. Basically, we have all of this different raw data that we've collected. And from that raw data, you can actually build your own custom dashboards based on what you need to see. Whether it's you want to understand more about how it impacts revenue, or maybe you want to understand more about a specific application like we have here, right, that TipsChange application that we were doing earlier. Or maybe you want to understand more about how long it took for a page to load, or where were most of the users using this application. So this custom dashboarding will actually allow you to see that. So just by going into this view here and by being able to see a few of the different things that we've covered in Digital Experience Insights, we've seen how we can actually understand more about that front-end performance, right, based on what a user interacts with. And we can actually understand more about the back-end performance, right? Not only what the user interacts with, what happens on the back end that fails, right? Where did it fail? What code level errors were thrown? How do we need to address that? And we can even go into the infrastructure level piece of it, where we can see a little bit more about what infrastructure supporting these applications, how did that infrastructure perform? Did that lend itself to the errors that we encountered on the application side? Or was it an independent non-related error? Or where are those errors occurring on the infrastructure? So with that in mind, we can actually go ahead and you can feel free to test your own systems with Digital Experience Insights. We actually offer a trial as well. We can include the link as well in the chat just in case it's not visible here. But we can actually create that 30-day trial and you can experiment yourself. So I encourage everyone to go ahead, give it a try. It's a free trial, and feel free to let me know your thoughts on it. All right.